Welcome to Home Cooked Stories, the podcast that brings flavor and inspiration to your ears. I'm your host, Julia Darling, a working mother with a family of 5 to feed and an insatiable appetite for all things food. Inspired by the life lessons from my mom, I believe food has profound links to our lives, from family recipes that leave a legacy, to the culinary journeys that define our travels, and the food that shapes our culture and lifestyle. Join me on this audio adventure as we dig into delicious topics, bringing more meaning and connectivity to our lives. And yes, we'll definitely work up an appetite. Remember, food isn't just what's on your plate. It helps tell the story of who you are. So wherever you are in this moment, pull up a seat and tune in, because life's too short for bland stories and boring meals. Welcome to Home Cooked Stories. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit of a story. On the morning that I woke up, I am running on about 4 hours of sleep. I think I went to bed around midnight and woke up at 4 a.m. so that I could head to the airport and catch my flight to Chicago. And with the help of a matcha latte and a cup of coffee on my American Airlines flight, I stepped off of the plane at O'Hare Airport and into an Uber headed for the city. And within about 30 minutes, I could just start to see my first glimpse of the Chicago skyline. And this brought back so many memories for me. I specifically remember being 18 years old and seeing the skyline for the first time in that same spot as my mom was driving me to Chicago to drop me off as a freshman in college. I am here for a weekend with some of my closest girlfriends from our undergraduate days. And our lives look quite a bit different than they did 20 plus years ago. We're married, we have kids, we don't live in the same town, let alone in the same state. But within an hour, we were toasting to Girls' Weekend in Wicker Park over shared plates of pierogies and beer like we had never missed a beat. Here at Home Cooked Stories, this podcast centers around food's connection to our lives. And I wanted an opportunity to tug on this idea a little bit more with this mini series around my girls' trip to Chicago and really open it up to talk more about life's experiences beyond the food that's on our plate. So food and travel become a bit more of the backdrop to these stories of connecting with ourselves and with each other. This episode and the one following are part travel guide, but really more focused on why these trips with friends matter, how they reconnect us with ourselves, and of course, what we ate and what we did along the way. You're also going to hear from my girlfriends in their own words talk about what these weekends mean to them and their favorite parts of the trip. And then stay tuned for the next episode where we'll talk more about what we find on these trips within ourselves and each other and the parts of those trips that we bring back home with us. So if you've been thinking about planning a girls' or a guys' weekend, this is your sign to make it happen. Pick up that phone and send that text or give your friends a call, because these weekends remind me that it's not indulgent to step away. It's really essential. Even if it's just one night or a staycation in your own city, give yourself that space to reconnect with friends and a part of you that doesn't get to show up in your day-to-day routine. All right, are you ready? Let's get into it.
I would 100% recommend taking the time to schedule a girls' weekend. In this stage in life that we're in, I often fall prey to the thoughts that I'm not being a good enough friend, I'm not picking up the phone, I'm not reaching out and chatting, and I feel like I should be doing more. But when you get around the table with your girlfriends, in the presence of good food and good drinks, you really just pick up where you've left off. You look around the table and acknowledge each other in the stage in life that we're at, in the season of life that we're at. And we're like, I got you. I understand. And you pick right up where you left off and you chat like no time has gone by, and you're in your 20s and you're in your dorm room and you're the same people at the very core, and everything just clicks.
So I wanted to start this conversation by really talking about 3 key benefits that I see around taking these types of trips with friends. I think part of the challenge in doing these types of trips is that it takes time and effort, right? I don't have the time. I'm just not able to make that a priority right now. But I think the reality is that it will never become a priority until you make it one. And so we have to get really intentional about what we want to spend our time and energy on and put in the effort to make it happen. For those of us that may be in the sandwich generation, we may have young kids at home and aging parents. We recognize the importance of continuing to nurture and cultivate these relationships, right? We only have our kids home for so long before they will leave the house and no longer be with us. And so we want to make those memories and form those strong bonds with them now. And in the same respect, we even understand the importance of making time for you and your spouse. At the end of the day, these kids are going to leave our house and they're going to go off and live their own lives and create their own families, and it will come back to being just the two of you. And so we recognize too that we have to spend time and put in the effort to maintain that relationship as well. And equally important is making time for yourself and yourself with friends. We all play multiple roles in life. And especially as we get older, I find that those roles only continue to expand. Even in the single role of being a parent, think about it. There's a lot of different hats that we wear in being a mom or a dad. I am a chauffeur, a chief entertainment officer, a short order cook. Sometimes I'm a room parent. I can be a homework helper and a tutor. I try to be a peacekeeper. The list goes on and on just within that one role. And so while my life may look a little different than it did when I was 22, there are still elements of that 22-year-old that are a part of who I am, even if they're tucked away in storage and don't get to come out as often as I would like. But these trips with friends are that opportunity to bring those sides of you out from hibernation. The second benefit that I find to these types of trips is even just in the planning, there's such anticipation and joy that comes with it. And I found it interesting. There's some research that came out at the start of the summer that found that 68% of U.S. travelers say the anticipation of their next trip is just as good, if not better, than the trip itself. And I sometimes can find this to be true because I can't predict how the trip is going to go. You have the highest of hopes and the best of intentions, and sometimes it turns out great, and sometimes there are not so great parts. But in the planning, it gives me something to look forward to, and it just increases my happiness. I love the thrill of beginning on a Monday and knowing that in 4 days, that out of office message is going to come on and mama is checking out. I've never been more motivated to get things off of my to-do list as I am when there is a trip within a few days' reach. And similarly, I find that in planning these girls' trips, my friends and I are communicating more often. We're trying to figure out, what part of the city do we want to stay in? And should we do a hotel or an Airbnb? Everybody loves to weigh in terms of restaurants or offering to make reservations at particular places. Or what do we want to do outside of where we're going to eat? So often it may go weeks, several months before we may have an opportunity to text each other or to give each other a call. But when we have these types of trips in our foreseeable future, it gives us an opportunity and motivation to reach out and connect with one another. And the third part that I think is probably the biggest benefit of all is that it is such a powerful reset button for many of us, especially those balancing daily family and work responsibilities. The mental break that it provides from our everyday roles and just the stress relief of being able to find support, camaraderie, and laughter with friends can be such a release. These trips allow us to physically step away from our everyday responsibilities that we may have and just fully get to be ourselves and focus on us for a period of time. Also an opportunity to reconnect with our own identity and what we think of ourselves. I can attest from personal experience and in hearing other friends of mine talk, particularly for those of us that have infants or young toddlers, there's a period of that time in which you can kind of lose your sense of self because these little people are so reliant on you. I mean, you are their world and they become your entire universe. And while it is so wonderful and worth every precious moment, there is still a part of you that goes, wait a minute, like there are things that I enjoy that I'm not able to do right now, or there's parts of me that I feel like I'm not able to nurture. And all of a sudden, my identity has become wrapped up in being so and so's dad or so and so's mom. So these weekends with friends are really an opportunity for laughter and inside jokes and sharing in life's experiences and kind of rekindling that part of our personality that may not always get to show up in our daily routines. I also think this time just gives me such a fresh perspective on things, and I get such a surge of creative energy from these weekends by giving myself an opportunity to shift my mindset, have a change in scenery, and bask in some camaraderie with friends. I find I go back home just feeling lighter and refreshed and motivated to show up well for my family.
What is one thing I always look forward to about these trips? Laughter, silliness, a chance to get out of my normal routine of thinking through everyday life. These trips are a great chance to bring you back to a form of yourself that you don't exercise every day.
So when we went to Chicago for this particular trip, we decided to stay in Wicker Park this time around. Now, if you've not been to Chicago before, I would probably recommend staying somewhere that is closer to downtown. Perhaps you need a little retail therapy and you want to go shopping on Michigan Avenue, or you want access to all of the wonderful museums that Chicago has to offer, or you want to go and visit the Bean and Millennium Park and Buckingham Fountain. Maybe you want to venture and experience Chicago's improv theater scene and take in a show at Second City. I would also highly recommend the architectural boat tour is one of my favorite things to do. It's such a beautiful perspective of being on the Chicago River and seeing the city from that vantage point. You know, certainly for this group of us, we lived in the city for 4 years. So we thought it might be nice to choose a neighborhood of Chicago and get a little bit more of a local flair for life in the city. Where we stayed in Wicker Park was really key to our overall experience there. We stayed at the Roby Hotel and loved it. It certainly is geared towards millennials, if I'm calling myself out. You walk into the lobby and they are piping Y2K pop hits. I am hearing Backstreet Boys, and there's a restaurant in the hotel straight ahead where there is clearly a lively brunch scene equipped with mimosas and avocado toast, and I was feeling it. The rooms themselves were quite Spartan in terms of their decor. There's not a whole lot of fuss or frills, but they are clean, they are comfortable, they were spacious. And so for the 3 and 4 of us that were staying in one hotel room amongst 2 queen beds, it really gave us enough space for what we needed. You know, our intention was not to hole up in a hotel room for the entire weekend. We wanted to be out and about in the city. And when we were at the Roby Hotel, my goodness, I mean, you stepped out the doors and you were literally a stone's throw away from a plethora of restaurants. So we could just meander spontaneously and pop in for snacks or a drink at our leisure, because to us, the most important part was just being able to catch up and spend quality time together. And on that note, our first dinner in Chicago was quite a standout meal. We went to Mama Delia. It's a Spanish restaurant and sherry bar, and they specialize in tapas and paella and creative cocktails. This place was recommended by a friend of mine, and I noticed that the restaurant had also been awarded the distinction of a Michelin Bib Gourmand, which signifies it as a restaurant that offers high-quality food at moderate prices, which is exactly what we were looking for. Good food, good cocktails, and a good price. So between the Michelin designation, the modern, swanky decor, and the tapas, we did ourselves right for the first night back together in the Windy City. There was something that appealed to all of our different food preferences and dietary restrictions. So it made it really easy with a group because we would go around the table and each of us would get to pick 1 to 2 dishes that we wanted to try. And so I just thought, how very fitting that we are going for tapas, which is truly such a communal way of eating, sharing plates, and being amongst friends, having wonderful conversation. There was a moment around the table that first night that I remember just taking a step back and thinking, this is why we go. This is why we show up for these weekends. And it's so important because we get to step away from being mom or dad or wife or husband and colleague. And while these roles don't leave us, I'm still wondering how everybody's doing at home, and are they getting off to bed on time? Are we getting along? But, all of those things will be waiting for us when we get back. So it's important to be in that moment and be present and make time for ourselves and each other, because we don't get to do it that often. And the food and the place are the supporting roles. It's really the conversation that's happening around that table and the people that you're with that make these trips totally worth it.
Why do these girls' weekends matter to me? They're a great chance for reconnection. These are some of the strongest bonds in my life. And when we're together, we inspire each other, we relate to each other because we're experiencing life at the same pace.
I think in some respects, it gets harder as we age to make new lifelong friends. Someone that's more than just that acquaintance or person that you're, occasionally meeting up with for coffee or for dinner. It gets harder because it requires more time and more effort to make those friendships. And it also takes time and effort to maintain the friendships that we already have. But I would argue that if you do make the time, life gets so much richer. We appreciate it so much more than I think we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So this is how we can nurture that side of ourselves and that community of friends and stay connected to one another. And if you have been craving this, maybe this is a sign to start planning your own weekend getaway with the girls. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be lavish. As I mentioned in the beginning, it could be a staycation in your own town. Or hey, if you want to take a week and go do an international vacation, more power to you. I think it's just important that we try and that we make those plans. Be sure to join me for part 2 of this mini series. In the next episode that'll publish soon, we are going to cover what these trips teach us about our friendships, what these trips teach us about ourselves, and then what are the pieces that we carry home with us and how they show up in our lives moving forward. And if you are really interested in visiting Chicago and looking for some recommendations on what to do, definitely reach out via email or on Instagram, and I would love to share some suggestions with you. Well, you guys, that brings part 1 to a wrap. Tune in next time for part 2 of this mini series around my girls' weekend in Chicago and how these trips are about so much more than what's on your plate. Until next time, eat well. Thank you all for listening to the episode today. If you find value in these stories, please share it with someone who would appreciate it too. A big part of why I wanted to start this podcast is to build a community of food lovers and home cooks alike. You taking less than a minute out of your day to share an episode, subscribe to the podcast, or leave a review is the greatest form of validation and means so much because it is helping us to build that community and connection with one another. Remember, a good story is meant to be shared. Until next time, eat well.